Hey there, humans, love and light. We're going to read chapter 3 of Science of Breath by Yogi Ramacharaka. I started reading this last week, and I didn't read anything on Saturday or Sunday. It was Mother's Day this past Sunday, and Saturday I had a lot of projects around the house that I really wanted to get done. The only reason why I'm sitting out here like this, if you haven't noticed, I'm sitting literally up against the side of the truck, my mom's boyfriend's truck. It's the sunniest place in the house right now. The backyard's really shaded, and I want it to be in direct sunlight because my skin needs it. It's good to have some sunlight, at least 20 minutes of sunlight a day. I heard that from somewhere. But anyway, so Science of Breath, Chapter 3 by Yogi Ramacharaka. This chapter is the exoteric theory of breath. If you've been listening or have read have listened to the other two live videos I did with this book, we've basically been talking about how the Western world doesn't breathe correctly. We breathe really shallow a lot of times, or we do low breathing, mid breathing, or high breathing, but it's actually healthy to do all three in something called the Yogi Complete Breath, and this book is going to help us learn how to do it. Super short, it's only 84 pages. I'm reading one chapter a day, just for the next 4 days. Wait, that's a lie. I've only read 2 chapters. there's 16 chapters, so like 3 pages in this chapter for the exoteric theory of breath. So let's get started. In this chapter, we will give you briefly the theories of the Western scientific world regarding the functions of the respiratory organs and the part in the human economy played by the breath. In subsequent chapters, we will give the additional theories and ascertained facts of the Oriental school in thought and research. The Oriental accepts the theories and facts of his West too, much that the latter do now accept, but which they will in due time discover, and which, after renaming, they will present to the world as a great truth. Disclaimer, if this is the first time you're tuning into this live video, in the last 2 videos, I always say this book is not written for the 2019 human. This book is written I think it was in the early 1900s, and some of the material may be a little bit outdated, or the language, the writing style, is not meant for us, but I'm trying to read it so it could be a little bit more conversational and we still get the benefits from it. Before taking up the Western idea, it will perhaps be better to give a hasty general idea of the organs of respiration. The organs of respiration consist of the lungs and the air passages leading to them. The lungs are 2 in number, 1 on each side of the median line, being separated from each other by the heart, the greater blood vessels, and the larger air tube. Each lung is free in all directions except at the root, which consists chiefly of the bronchi, arteries, and veins connecting the lungs and the trachea and heart. The lungs are spongy and porous, and their tissues very elastic. They are covered with a delicately constructed but strong sac known as the pleural sac, one wall of which closely adheres to the lung and the other in the inner wall of the chest, and which slide easily upon each other in the act of breathing. The air passages consist of the interior of the nose, pharynx, larynx. When we breathe, we draw in air through the nose, in which is warmed by contact with the mucous membrane, which is richly supplied with blood. After it has passed through the pharynx and larynx, it passes into the trachea or windpipe, which subdivides into numerous tubes called the bronchial tubes or bronchia, which in turn subdivides into and terminate in minute subdivisions in all the smaller air spaces in the lungs, of which the lung contains millions. A writer has stated that if the air cells, this is so stinking cool. A writer has stated that if the air cells of the lungs were spread out over an unbroken surface, they would cover an area of 14,000 square feet. Just think about that for a second. They say the same thing with the intestines. Intestines would go for, so all of your, all of the air cells in your lungs, if they were put onto a flat surface, it would literally take, air is drawn into the lungs by the action of the diaphragm, a great strong flat sheet-like muscle stretched across the chest, separating the chest box from the abdomen. The diaphragm's action is almost as automatic as that of the heart, although it may be transformed into a semi-voluntary muscle by an effort of the will. When it expands, it increases the size of the chest and lungs, and the air rushes into the vacuum thus created. When it relaxes, the chest and lungs contract, and the air is expelled out of the lungs. Now, before considering what happens to the air in the lungs, let us look a little into the matter of the circulation of the blood. So, okay, basically what we just listened to was your nostril passage and how that works, how the air passes down your trachea into your lungs. And if you ever looked at a diagram of the lungs, there are these little spindly pieces that kind of come off of the lungs, and those are your bronchioles or your bronchia. And then, of course, when people say, like, if you ever heard somebody say it with your chest, you're actually speaking from the diaphragm instead of speaking from your throat. Like, if you've heard somebody with that has very high breathing, it's so funny. Later on in this book, he says high breathing, which is a fan of females of the West or something like that. But like when women like speak from the top of their throats, it kind of, you hear it from in here. But then as you breathe correctly and speak, say it with your chest, or speak from your diaphragm, you actually hear it from the diaphragm. That's what he was saying, that box-shaped muscle that expands and contracts, that's here. Now, before considering what happens to the air in the lungs, let us look a little into the matter of the circulation of blood. The blood, as you know, is driven by the heart through the arteries into the capillaries, thus reaching every part of the body, which it vitalizes, nourishes, and strengthens. It then returns by means of the capillaries by another route, the veins, to the heart, from whence it is drawn into the lungs. The blood starts on its arterial journey bright red and rich, laden with life-giving qualities and properties. It returns by the venous route, poor, blue, and dull, being laden down with the waste matter of the system. It goes out like a fresh stream from the mountains. It returns as a stream of sewer water. This foul stream goes to the right auricle, A-U-R-I-C-L-E, it's the first time I'm reading this, of the heart. When this auricle becomes filled, it contracts and forces the stream of blood through an opening in the right ventricle of the heart, which in turn sends it onto the lungs, where it is distributed by millions of hair-like blood vessels to the air cells of the lungs, of which we have spoken. Now let us take up the story of the lungs at this point. The foul stream of blood is now distributed among the millions of tiny air cells in the lungs. A breath of air is inhaled, and oxygen of the air comes in contact with the impure blood, the blue blood, through the thin walls of the hair-like blood vessels of the lungs, walls which are thick enough to hold the blood, but thin enough to admit the oxygen to penetrate them. When the oxygen comes in contact with the blood, a form of combustion takes place, and the blood takes up oxygen and releases carbon acid gas generated from the waste product and poisonous matter, which has been gathered up by the blood from all parts of the system. Hey guys! Hey Jada! The blood thus purified and oxygenated is carried back to the heart, again rich, red, and bright, and laden with life-giving properties and qualities. Upon reaching the left auricle of the heart, it is forced into the left ventricle, from whence it is again forced out through the arteries on its mission of life to all parts of the system. It is estimated that in a single day of 24 hours, 35,000 pints of blood traverse the capillaries of the lungs. The blood corpuscles passing in single file and being when one considers the minute detail of the process alluded to, he is lost in wonder and admiration at nature's infinite care and intelligence. Basically, go watch a video on how the respiratory system and the circulation system work. It will be seen that unless fresh air is in sufficient quantities reaches the lungs, the foul stream of constantly not only is the blood thus robbed of nourishment, but the waste products, which should have been destroyed and returned to the circulation and poison the system, and death ensues. Impure air acts in the same way, only in a lessened degree. It will also be seen that if one does not breathe in a sufficient quantity of air, the work of the blood cannot go on properly, and the result is that the body is insufficiently nourished and disease ensues, or as a state of imperfect health is experienced. A little reflection will show purified by the regenerative process of the lungs, it returns to the arteries in an abnormal state. Insufficiently purified and imperfectly, if returned to the system, will certainly manifest as resulting from impaired function in some insufficiently nourished organ or tissue. The blood, when properly exposed to the air in the lungs, not only has its impurities consumed and parts with its noxic carbon acid gases, but it also takes up and absorbs a certain quantity of oxygen, which it carries to all parts of the body, where it is needed in order that nature may perform her process properly. When the oxygen comes in contact with the blood, it unites in the hemoglobin of the blood and is carried to every cell, tissue, muscle, and organ, which it invigorates and strengthens, replacing the worn-out cells and tissue. Arterial blood, properly exposed to the air, contains about 25% of free oxygen. Not only is every part vitalized by the organ, but the act of digestion depends materially upon a certain amount of oxygenation of the food, and this can be accomplished only by the oxygen in the blood coming in contact with the food and producing a certain form of combustion. It is therefore necessary that a proper supply of oxygen be taken through the lungs. This accounts for the fact that weak lungs and poor digestion are so often found together. To grasp the full significance of this statement, one must remember that the entire body receives nourishment from the food assimilated, and that imperfect assimilation always means an imperfectly nourished body. Even the lungs themselves depend on the same source for nourishment, and if through imperfect breathing the assimilation becomes imperfect and the lungs in turn become weakened, they are rendered still less able to perform their work properly, and so in turn the body becomes further weakened. Every particle of food and drink must be oxygenated, and before the waste products of the system can be returned to the proper lack of sufficient oxygen means imperfect nutrition, imperfect elimination, and imperfect health. Verily, breath is life. The combustion arising from the change in the waste products generates heat and equalizes the temperature of the body. Good breathers are not apt to take cold, and they generally have plenty of good warm blood, which enables them to resist the changes in the other temperature. Almost done, one more chapter. In addition to the above-mentioned important process, the act of breathing gives exercise to the internal organs and muscles, a feature which is generally overlooked by the Western writers on the subject, but which the yogis fully appreciate. So basically, if you breathe in, you're also exercising. Fun fact. If you're breathing properly, you're also exercising. In imperfect or shallow breathing, only a portion of the lung cells are brought into play, and a great portion of the lung capacity is lost, the system suffering in proportion to the amount of under-oxygenation. The lower animals in their native state breathe naturally, and primitive man undoubtedly did the same. The abnormal manner of living adopted by civilized man, the shadow that follows upon civilization, has robbed us of our natural high. Man's only physical salvation is to get back to nature. I love that. So basically, chapter 3, Science of Breath, the exoteric theory of breathing, this is by Yogi Ramacharaka, was all about respiration, how it works, what it actually means to breathe, what your internal organs look like, which organs are oxygenated, and how that oxygen circulates through just 3 days in a row, or by chapter 3, I'm a little bit more wise on what actually happens in the body when we breathe. So it also begs the question, or I shouldn't say it begs the question, it answered the question that breathing is vital. It's super important. If we're not eating foods that are already rich in oxygen, then where is our nourishment going to come from? Or better yet, what happens down the road when we don't get enough of this oxygen, or if we don't breathe at full capacity? I am all about holistic practices when it comes to regenerating and healing the body. Everything from eating alkaline food off of Dr. Sebi's food list, and some from Dr. Gundry as well. If you don't know who Dr. Gundry is, check him out. He's was one of the top heart surgeons in the world, did some research, realized that we're not eating what we're supposed to be eating, and formed a basically alkaline-based plan to get us back on track. And so I went to the doctor today, and as my blood pressure was being read, I asked the nurse to help me navigate the chart that was happening. And so one thing I noticed is that my breath was at 100% capacity. So since starting reading this book last week, I've started practicing the Yogi Complete Breathing. And once you get it, you get it. It's hard to do that upper chest breathing. Now I breathe fully from my abdomen and allow my stomach to fill up, or allow the lower part of my lungs to fill up first, then the middle section of your chest and the upper section of your lungs fill up naturally, and then that same exact process happens where your stomach goes down first, then the middle of your chest, then your upper chest. And I was breathing at 100% capacity. So not to say that that had anything to do with yogi breathing, because apparently if you are breathing and you're not getting 100%, anything under 90, like, they rush you to the hospital, because you shouldn't be getting that least amount of oxygen. But anyway, I'm wiser after reading Science of Breath for chapter 3. And of course, I'll have this up on my IGTV video, minus, the cuts with my family and stuff walking by. I am in my driveway. Mom had to go pick up some of her after school kids. So I'll cut that bit out. I'll add it to my IGTV, and I'll also put it up on YouTube for the masses to enjoy. Love and light. I hope you're the wiser from this as well.